to start the Hudsonville Public Schools May 23rd work session. Thanks for coming this evening, everyone, on a nice spring evening. We will start off by calling the work session to order. All board members are present with the exception of Larry Kapniga. Robin's going to connect with Larry and...
He did not answer.
Okay. Well, sometimes he shows up a little late, so we'll just keep an ear open for him, keep an eye open for him. So, otherwise, everybody else is here. So first off, can I have an approval, a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Motion by Chad.
Support.
Support by Steve.
I'd like to make a motion to move the comment period up to the front of the agenda so that people can leave if they choose to, or if they choose to stay, we can continue with our discussion.
Okay. Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
Second by Chad. Any questions or comments on that motion to move the comments up? Okay, all in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Now we will act on the motion that's on the table to approve the agenda as amended. Can I have we have a motion and a second. All in favor of the agenda, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay, now we move on to recognition of visitors and hearing the people present. Dr. Vanderjack has the timer on his laptop there. And I think we have 4 individuals who would like to address the board this evening, so we will start off with Gwen Snewing. I think this is Gwen.
I'm here tonight to ask for definitive action on book policy. If you follow national news, you know that there's no end to the number of sexually explicit books that can make their way into our buildings. We've all heard the justification that the kids have seen R-rated movies, so what's the big deal? They drink, so why not provide it? And now pornography, what's the big deal? But we frequently grieve about the brokenness of our children's lives, immersing minors in innumerable sexual acts, mostly promiscuous and often violent, plant seeds of normalization and acceptance of risky and detrimental behavior. Let's not join the culture of giving up. For years, people have moved to Hudsonville because of the schools. And what made Hudsonville schools outstanding? It was the teachers and families that held to high standards. These high standards were not because the people of Hudsonville were superior in any way. It was because the majority of the people who founded our community were Christians. Christians aren't better than anyone else. We all mess up, but because of our relationship with Christ, we get a fresh start every day, and we aim for God's standards because they bring peace and fullness to our lives. The number of intact families in Hudsonville continue to give strength to our district. Many people are committed to high standards for their children, and unfortunately, in the books that have been brought for review, students were well into sexualized texts before the parents were aware of the content. So what can be done? I'm asking that you please require an up-to-date online listing of the title and author of every book used in every class, including those classroom shelves used for choice reading. That way parents have plenty of time to vet the books if they choose. I also ask that you please require honest disclosure about sexual content and violent content on the permission slips. Without this, parents aren't really informed, they're being played. Please simplify the book review process. It needs to be quicker and easier. Please restrict books with graphic, step-by-step descriptions of actual sexual acts. If explicit content is brought forward, perhaps the teacher could read the passage aloud to the parents in the presence of the principal and another staff member in the school office within 2 days, and they could vote whether that content was appropriate to be read to a minor. And if deemed inappropriate, the book could be removed to the actual library, or better yet, donated to the public library. If it's still controversial, they could repeat the process, perhaps adding 3 board members at the next board meeting so that it all happened within a couple of weeks. Our kids and parents deserve high standards, and this is important work. Please don't delay any longer. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, next we have Aaron Newby.
Greetings, board. Short and sweet today. I just wanted to say thank you for all of the hard work you've done and all of the hard work the administrators have done and all of the teachers and the countless hours that the library staff and English staff has put into the book review. I think you all have done an amazing job. It makes me sad to hear people still trying to rehash that same thing. I think what you have done is wonderful. You've set standards for not only yourself, but future board members, and as well as I heard lots of administrators say this is something that can be reproduced to other boards and other school districts. So very well done. I applaud all of the work that you put into it, and please pass on applause to all of the administrators and English team as well, because I know they have spent countless hours dealing with this instead of other things, and they have done an amazing job. So thank you all.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Lauren Nykamp.
I too, board, want to thank you. Barb, Mark, Larry, Steve, and Ken, you all spoke out against the book Half of a Yellow Sun in previous board meetings. So why isn't the book policy on the agenda tonight? I understand that there is training tonight, but is this training more important than the pornographic material being offered to children? Ken, at the previous work session, you made notes, and if I remember correctly, you said the book policy would be revisited and there was room for improvement. Why are these improvements being pursued? I hope this isn't a ploy to bury this. Community, I call to you to ensure that it does not get buried. Our tax dollars in this community deserve better than having this kind of trash-filled books in front of our children. I also want to encourage you, board, to not poo-poo away that millage result. The discussion needs to be revisited. The community is sending a message. Why is HPS continuing the pilot program of Ruler? The definition of pilot is a program made to test an audience's reaction. How long will this test go on? The audience has spoken to you over and over again. In fact, many staff members say that it isn't even working. In fact, it's giving opposite effects than what you're hoping for. I encourage those questioning Ruler to keep asking questions and putting pressure on the board to do the right thing, which is to listen to the community and the nearly 50% of your staff that said no to Ruler. Although HBS is proceeding as if the Ruler pilot is happening next year, the board never officially voted on it. So board, you have the opportunity to show some integrity and turn from this mistake of Ruler. Speaking of integrity, it was insinuated at the last work session, last board meeting rather, that much of the community is operating under non-factual information. I will tell you what I tell my children. Lies will be found out and truth will be seen. It has been 15 months since the community started to wake up to this administration and what they've been doing. Each conversation and each FOIA discovers more lies. I encourage you, board, to have integrity, which is doing what is right, no matter who's watching. Finally, to the community, the stakes are too high to keep your children under this administration. Although it may seem like a mountain to get them out, I guarantee you, your kids are worth it. And ultimately, the years will seem few in the grand scheme of things. There are a ton of options other than HPS. Again, the stakes are too high, and your children are worth it.
Thank you for your comments. Just a note, just a reminder, please, that public comment time is meant for individuals to address the board. There are other venues to address the community, and we do appreciate comments directed to the board, and we take those comments seriously. So, last up, we have Randy Beist.
3 minutes. It's a short time when you start preparing, you know that? Last night, I had the honor, yesterday afternoon, to go to Kalamazoo College. My son, our middle, is a freshman there. He had a mere 3.8 or so here at Hudsonville. Probably 100 students above his caliber education-wise. K is known as one of the top academic institutions in Michigan. My son is struggling to put making the dean's list. I couldn't be prouder. The kid really doesn't care about education. I know we have a lot of work to do. And yet, last month at our board meeting, the retiring teachers of our district, wow, really beyond words. These professionals have given their entire careers, or almost their entire careers, to us here at Hudsonville. Salem Falls City, why here? I mean, really, why didn't they go to City High or who knows where? The other side of the state where they could have made twice as much. Some of those, magnet schools. I never met Paul Tinbrink, but I knew he was a legend. And when Mr. Beal introduced him as coach, I felt my jaw begin to quiver. Kind of like my legs shaking now. I knew I was in greatness. When I heard Chris Westfield's name called, I was friends with her in high school. I hadn't seen her in decades. There she was, her whole career. She spent here at Hudsonville. Why here? She'd been here. When I look at our academic rankings, they're amazing. There's a district that stands taller than us around us. Amazing. How us at Hudsonville? Doug, how do you keep getting administrators from all over the place to come here? I had a conversation a month ago with a super at Allendale. He called me. He wanted my advice on something. And then you stole one of his people. Well done. Since our last board meeting, I've had the opportunity to talk to a handful of realtors to see my in-laws are moving, and they want me to help when they're getting older. And I kept saying to realtors, because my father-in-law is a Dutchman, he wants to find the least expensive one. And I said to each realtor, what makes people want to move to Hudsonville? I mean, the state's losing people, but Ottawa County's exploding. Hudsonville, obviously we're exploding. I mean, we can't talk about buildings enough, right? And the only response I get is Hudsonville schools. Literally, that's the response. So in the midst of so much work to do, I close with this. Dr. Vanderjack, go enjoy graduation Thursday night. Another class is well prepared to use their ego strengths. And it's with your leadership. I'll say it publicly, I had doubts when you came. No more doubts. And to your people, tell them, on behalf of all of us as a community, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, with that, we move on to discussion items. And we have MASB Training. This evening, we're happy to welcome Jay Bennett from MASB to take us through a board assessment survey, something that we've done, I think it's been 5 or 7 years, maybe, I don't recall exactly, since we did the last one. Okay. But it's good for the board to take some time and do some self-assessment, some self-reflection, and see where we need to grow and develop, just like we expect of our administrative team and teachers.
Absolutely. So good evening, everybody. I have a board roster here, so if you could just take a look at your information, go ahead and initial it. That shows me that you were here tonight, so you get credit for it. And then if you see anything that needs to be changed, anything needs to be corrected, please go ahead and make those notes, pass that around, and I'll try to remember to take it back with me. Sometimes I end up leaving them. I just get to grab them now. So, Robin, don't let me leave without them. All right, thank you. So good evening, everybody. My name is Jay Bennett. I'm the Assistant Director for Executive Search Services at the Michigan Association of School Boards. My primary responsibilities with the association are around the areas of superintendent search, superintendent evaluation, and then also board governance. And this tonight would be that board governance piece of it. I am a former board member myself, having served on my local board of education in Grand Ledge, Michigan, and also on my RESA board in Eaton County. And I'm also a former K-12 special education teacher. So I've been involved in education in one way, shape, or form since the age of 5, which was mysteriously just only 30 years ago. And it's amazing how that all just kind of comes along. All right, so in front of you, I dropped off a packet, and it's the same information that I have here on the slide deck. As we go through these, our focus tonight will be in those areas in which I see a little bit of red or yellow. Those are the areas that have been deemed as either an area of improvement or an area where we're just satisfactory. Those areas where I'm seeing predominantly green, we'll kind of gloss over those. Those are areas in which you as a board are pretty happy with your progress. Unless there's something that you really want to drill in on, we'll just kind of go through those. As we're going through this, if I gloss over something that you do want to talk about, then please feel free to interject. I want this to be an open and free conversation amongst you as a board. That's the way that we'll get the most out of this tonight. So we'll start with the response scale explanations. So 0 is don't know, and that's the blue. 1, unsatisfactory, most of the board members do not perform or ensure that factors within this question are done. 2, needs improvement, only a few board members perform or ensure that factors within this question are done. 3, satisfactory, most board members perform or ensure most of the factors within this question are done. Good, all board members perform or ensure all factors within this question are done most of the time. And then a 5, excellent, all board members perform or ensure all factors within this question are always done. So as we look at your overall averages, you'll see that in the areas of academic performance accountability, we're here at a 4.0. In the area of board responsibilities at a 4.12. Community engagement and advocacy, 4.13. So those all fall squarely within that good range. So those are the areas that we probably won't spend as much time talking about tonight. Leadership, 3.07. Board effectiveness, 3.92. Data-driven decision-making, 3.78. Board super relations, 3.77. Those all fall right there in that satisfactory area, and those are the areas in which we'll probably spend most of our evening tonight. So just looking at this right off the top, anything in here jump out at you as surprising? Pretty much what we'd expect. Okay. Now taking just a little bit of a deeper dive into it, we'll note in this area of leadership, that's where we're seeing the highest percentage of that red, needs improvement or unsatisfactory, kind of that deeper red, 32.9%. We also see a little bit of that in the board effectiveness, 8.8%, and then board super relations there, 11.4%, data-driven decision-making, 9.5%. So those, again, are those areas in which we're seeing a little bit more of that red, that needs improvement, and that unsatisfactory. And those are the areas that we'll spend a little bit more time with tonight. So right out the gate here, leadership. So this is your lowest scoring area. This first question is around clearly articulating the vision and mission statements for the board. 6 of you were in the green on this one. We did have one board member that thought that this was an area that could use some improvement. Not looking to, this wasn't an anonymous test that you, or not test, assessment that you perform. And so not wanting to point out who the one is, but let's just have a discussion for a quick second here. Do we have a clear mission and vision statement for the district? Okay. Is this something that we can articulate as a board if asked? As an individual board member, do we know what the mission and vision statement are for the district? Okay. So I know we had a little bit of discussion early, before we started the meeting tonight while we were kind of having some of our dinner here with a couple of you. And I had expressed that it is unusual in a district of this size to not have a dedicated space for a board to meet, so a dedicated meeting space. And one of the reasons that is surprising to me is because a lot of times when I'm in districts such as yours, when we have that dedicated space, it's an opportunity to display things such as our mission and vision statements to make it part of our regular practice, something that we can always be reminded of. It is not unusual sometimes to come into a district and on the back of your name placards to have a vision or mission statement. So again, something that you're always thinking about. It's not uncommon to have it on your minutes, on your board agenda. And I didn't get a look at the board agenda tonight. I didn't know if you have it as part of your board agenda, but a lot of boards will have the mission and vision statement on their agenda.
I'll admit that I probably once a month I got to go back out and refresh. And so, because can I rattle it off the top of my head? No, I have to go out and refresh and remember. So, not to jump to conclusions,
Sure.
but I like the idea of having it elsewhere besides in our
So,
websites and elsewhere.
the reason that this vision and mission statement are important, we have research that tell us that those districts that are successful in moving the academic needle, meaning those districts that are successful in increasing academic achievement for its students, are districts that are mission and vision driven. They're goal-driven districts, okay? They have a clear mission and vision, they have a clear set of goals and expectations, and they are something that they adhere to. So everything that they do as a board is an adherence to that mission and vision. Everything they do as a board is an adherence to those goals that they're trying to accomplish. Your administration, your teachers, everybody's working towards that clear mission, vision, and goal statements. I know sometimes I come into districts, I do strategic planning for districts sometimes, And, I get a lot of this, well, those mission vision statements, that's just marketing stuff. It's not. Okay, it's only marketing stuff if you just put it together and then shelve it and never look at it again. If it is something that you're constantly talking about and constantly reinforcing, then it's much more than just that marketing stuff. I can think of a district in which, in their boardroom, they have a wall a little bit longer than this one, but pretty close to this. And on that entire wall, they have their mission across the top, they have their vision underneath that, they have the 5 goals that they're working on as part of their strategic plan on placards like this. And so it takes up the whole wall. So it's something that the board is literally faced with at every board meeting. Every board meeting that they have, their goal, vision, mission statements are right there staring them in the face. And so that is a board where it's very hard for them to not remind themselves as to why we're sitting here at this meeting, okay? So just something to think about. All right, considering community perspectives of all stakeholder groups in determining district priorities. Again, I've got 2 here in the red, I've got 2 in the yellow, which is satisfactory. So there is some room for improvement here. So let's talk about this for a minute. When we're talking about considering community perspectives, so one of the ways that we get community perspectives, we've already done tonight, and that is through our public comment at our meetings. What are some other ways that we as a board and as an administration can get some of those community perspectives to help us determine our district priorities?
We've done surveys,
Okay?
which are a little more anonymous.
Okay? How else?
We could do like town halls or have like coffee or meets and greets with the board, which we currently don't do.
Okay?
That would be an option.
All right. Do we have a strategic plan in place here in Hudsonville?
Yes.
Okay. And when did we start that strategic plan?
10 years ago, maybe?
Well, the process runs SOAR 4.
It's a 3-year process.
It's a 3-year process, and we're on the 4th iteration of that 3-year process.
Okay. So when it comes time to put together the goals for that strategic planning process, is that an opportunity for you to engage the community, and do you do that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good, good. And again, research that tells us that those districts that include all of their stakeholders in determining the priorities for the district are those districts that do well academically, okay? If they're created in a bubble, if it's just the board and the administration sitting down and creating these goals for the entire district, you're not going to get the buy-in that's necessary in order to make progress towards those goals. The teachers, the community members, if they're not part of that process, the parents, if they're not part of that process, the students, if we don't include them as part of that process, we're not going to get the buy-in, and it's going to be very difficult for us to make any progress on those goals. So when I go into a district to do strategic planning, I make sure that I meet with all those constituent groups. I make sure that when we have our retreat day and develop our mission, our vision, our belief statements, our goal statements, that we have a good representation of not only the staff, but also of our community, parents. Hopefully we can get a couple high school students in there. Because again, we want that well-rounded grouping of people, okay? When we think back to our evaluation of our superintendent, one of the things that we evaluate our superintendent on is feedback, okay? And it's not feedback about job performance, okay? It's up to you as a board to evaluate the superintendent, and only you as a board to evaluate the superintendent. The types of feedback that we're talking about in that evaluation instrument, what types of systems does your superintendent have in place for getting feedback from community, staff, students, as it relates to the priorities for the district? Proactive superintendents tend to be highly effective. Reactive superintendents tend to be effective. Proactive, highly effective superintendents are making the phone calls, sending out the emails, sending out the surveys, reaching out to those individuals directly. Reactive or effective superintendents are answering the phone calls, answering the emails, wait for somebody to, stop by the office or yell out at them at the grocery store or whatever. So more of kind of that reactive, just kind of waiting for things to happen as opposed to being proactive and making things happen, okay? So that's the kind of feedback that we're talking about. So I can think of an instance of a superintendent that would routinely meet with the PTA and PTO presidents and vice presidents of the district and talk about priorities for the district. And that was a proactive way of the superintendent going out and getting that information. Not waiting for those PTA and PTO presidents, vice presidents to show up to a board meeting or to make a phone call or to send an email, but actively setting those meetings and then meeting with those groups on a regular basis. Okay? So that's the kind of feedback systems that we're looking for. So we had a couple unsatisfactories here. So what do we think that is in relation to? How are we not meeting this need in reaching out to our community to set district priorities?
So as you're talking about it, I'll be honest, I struggled with the phraseology of your question a little bit. So as
Yeah.
you're talking, it makes sense because your recommendations are in line with how do you solicit as much robust feedback as possible from the community, which is great. I think when you read it, sometimes different individuals place different emphasis on different words.
Okay.
So you could, overemphasize the word consider or the word all or the word priorities and come up with different conclusions as to what
Sure.
the question was seeking. So if you, as an example, if you overemphasize the word all, it's consider community perspectives of all stakeholder groups in determining district priorities. And we've had some discussion as a board where I would say in different conversations that all stakeholder groups might be a trigger word in terms of, are we truly considering all stakeholder groups? But I appreciate your interpretation of it, recommendation of it. It's really about how do you solicit as robust as possible of feedback
Right.
from them.
Yeah, for me, it's more about the systems than the results, only because we can't control the results, right? We can control the systems. We can create the systems that encourage as many people as possible to participate. We can't force them to participate. So if we have good systems in place, then hopefully everything else will follow. But if it doesn't, well, we still can rest assured in the fact that we did the best that we could by creating an open system and encouraging everybody to come and everybody to show up and everybody, we sent out that survey to everybody that we had an email for, right? We sent out that robocall to everybody that we had a phone number for. But if they don't respond to the surveys, or they don't respond to the phone calls, the robocalls, there's not a lot we can do. But if we're not at least making the effort, if we're not at least putting those systems in place, then we're at fault. But if we're putting those systems in place and doing our best to solicit as much of that information, hit as many of those groups as possible, then we're there. And to your point, if we emphasize that word consider. So maybe we have those systems in place, maybe we're hitting as many of those groups as possible, but then maybe we're not effective in what we do with that information when we get it. So yes, we've got the information, but are we really considering it in our decision making? And that's a different question, right? So coming at it from that perspective, are we considering the information that we do get when it comes time to setting our district priorities and our district goals?
Jay, do you see very many boards using town hall meetings and forums like that to try and get feedback?
It really depends. I mean, obviously, by default, your board meetings are an opportunity for anyone that wants to show up and participate in public comment to show up and participate in public comment. So that is one form for sure. I'm sure that all of you hear from people in the community on a regular basis, emails, Facebook posts, messages, text messages, phone calls, whatever, grabbing you in the grocery store, the movie theater, the restaurant. So I'm sure that you have opportunities to interact with people. I mean, if they want to find you, they're going to find you, right? Now, as far as having deliberate meetings, it really kind of depends on, now obviously, and this probably is not surprising you, but when we're talking about things such as bonds and things of that nature, we'll generally going to have those kinds of meetings. Do we sometimes wait until there's an issue to address before we have those meetings? Sometimes, right? And so would we be more effective if we had some proactive meetings or had a regular occurrence of meetings instead of waiting for a particular issue to come up that drives us toward a meeting? Maybe. But then again, I also understand, that this is a volunteer opportunity for all of you. You all have other things. You all have jobs, most likely, or did have a job at some point. You have families. You have other activities besides your volunteer time on the board. And so your time is valuable as well. Your administrators, your teachers, your staff, they're working hard enough during the day, and some of them at night, at volleyball games, and all the kinds of things that are going on in the district at night. I mean, our parking lot, those cars out there are not representative of the people in this room. So there's obviously other things going on in the district right now, which means that there's district employees in the district right now. So we have to be respectful of their time as well. Now, I will tell you that with the advent and the much more higher use of things like Zoom and other video conferencing, we have seen some districts that have started to leverage that for meetings. And that's going to work better in districts that have consistent connectivity throughout the district, things of that nature. So in this area, you probably have still, even within your district, you probably have some pockets where maybe they don't have the best connectivity. Or even if they have connectivity, don't necessarily have the wherewithal to have it at home or have it consistently at home. So it's not a perfect solution, but we have started to see some increase in the use of the virtual meeting spaces as well.
When doing town hall meetings and you're trying to talk about issues and address it, how do you balance the voice of the individual versus the voice of the board?
Yeah, that's $1 million question. One of the most effective ways is to have a trained facilitator facilitate those kinds of things, because a trained facilitator is going to be able to set up a structure that is effective in getting as much information from as many people as possible. And again, if you're fortunate enough to have somebody in the community that does that kind of work, as part of their 9 to 5, then maybe they're willing to give you some time to facilitate such a meeting like that. But that is probably one of the more effective ways, because not knowing any of you, unless any of you are a trained facilitator by trade, it might be a little difficult for you to kind of manage a meeting like that. Whereas someone like myself that is trained in facilitation and trained in a variety of ways of getting information from people like that, then that's going to be a little more effective of a meeting. Yes, sir.
This is kind of inferred, I think, in Steve's comment here, but there are two constraints that I see. The open meetings are a delightful thing. The comments are certainly welcome, but this isn't really the best forum in which to respond to comments. That could be a never-ending meeting if we respond to every comment that's
Yes,
made.
absolutely.
And on the other end, we want to speak as a whole. We hesitate to have board members speak for the entire board. But the frustrating thing is that people have questions. They need to have interaction with the board, and it's not happening. Maybe the facilitator's the answer, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one thing to look into. To Don's point earlier about surveys and things of that nature, surveys are a good way to get some of that information from a variety of people, and you're getting very targeted, very direct information. The trick there, though, is that there are poorly written surveys, and then there are very well written surveys. And so that again is where, if you are fortunate enough to have somebody that or somebody within your community that writes these kinds of things for a living, marketing people know how to get answers to those kinds of questions, right? They know how to write questions if they're looking for particular answers, or at least looking for getting well-rounded answers. They know to use something besides a yes/no question, right? Because if you use a yes/no question, you're going to get a yes or a no. Well, we need to get a little deeper than that, so you need to write the survey questions in such a way in which it gets deeper. The survey that we use for not only our public, for our strategic planning, but also specifically the one that we use for when we do superintendent search, we had a survey that we used for a long time, and then we were in a district, and one of the board members was a marketing professional and said, hey, I have some suggestions for you on your survey. And the survey that we have now is much better, and it elicits the exact kind of information that we're looking at when we're concerned with the superintendent. Okay, so moving on to question 3 here, around an environment that ensures that commitments and directives are in the best interest of all students. Again, I've got 2 in the red, 3 in the yellow here. So where are we here on creating that environment that ensures that commitments and directives are in the best interest of all students? At the end of the night, that's what we're here for, right? We're here for the kids. And so are all the things that we're talking about at the board table related to what's in the best interests of our students. And, I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen in board meetings where they get mired down in the muck on things such as, well, what are our school colors here?
Maize and blue.
Maize and blue, okay. Well, should the tops be yellow and the bottoms be blue, or should the bottoms be blue or yellow and the tops be blue? And, boards getting and it's like, okay, that's not, the kids are going to play basketball, whether their tops are blue and bottoms are yellow, or it's vice versa. It really doesn't matter. Do they have uniforms? Okay, let's move on. But sometimes we get mired in some of that stuff. And sometimes I think it's because those are relatively easy discussions to get mired down in, as opposed to some of the more difficult discussions that we may have to get into sometimes. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the types of things that we're addressing as a board at the board table are in the best interest of all students. So what else do we have? Because like I said, we've got a couple reds here, a couple yellows.
I think the key word there is odd, and to be totally frank, that's something we've dealt with for the past year.
Okay.
And as there have been directives that we have given to our administration to serve a certain population of people who might need it, but that particular programming might not be popular, then it's difficult, it seems difficult to, for us to commit to those directives we gave 2 years ago under our SOAR plan, because it's not possibly as popular as we would have liked it to have been.
Okay.
SOAR plans or strategic plans.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah. Yep, I saw some in the hallway. Yep,
Yeah.
that's great. Okay. What else?
I think Dawn captured it well. We have some misalignments, some misconfusion, some confusion, some other aspects regarding what we're asking the administrative team to do, how we want to approach that, how different stakeholders may perceive that. We're not all aligned in terms of how we want to approach some things that are in our strategic plan.
Okay. So, and I say this in, not that I try to come into these types of meetings without having done a lot of homework, because I don't want to have any preconceived ideas or notions as to what's going on. So I haven't done a lot of deep digging into the goings-on in Hudsonville. I looked through the survey, had a brief conversation with the board president, had a brief conversation with the superintendent. I know that when it comes to, let's just talk about curriculum, for instance, and this is just a for instance. I'm not saying that this is anything that has happened here or will happen here, but just as a for instance, curriculum. So it's one of those things where, in my experience, in some districts, it's very easy to talk about the AP stuff, right? The advanced placement stuff and all the excelling stuff and all the great things that we offer. It's really easy to talk about those things because those are the kinds of things that make us feel good. Right? We have more AP offerings than anybody else. We have more kids, going to college, and that's great stuff, easy to talk about. It's more difficult to talk about the kids in our district that aren't doing as well as we think they could be doing. It's not as easy to talk about the types of things that we need, the types of processes that we need to put in place to address those areas in which we, frankly, are facing shortcomings. Right? Those are the hard things to talk about. But those are the things that are important to talk about. Because it's easy to offer more AP courses. Easy being relative, but it's easier to talk about those things. It's easier to talk about all the great things happening. It's tougher to talk about the things that are challenging for us. Okay? As a board, it is our responsibility to kind of set that big picture. Okay? And then let the superintendent and his team come up with the ways that we're going to get there. So if we as a board say, we've got to address this academic achievement gap. We have a significant number of children that are doing well. We have a significant number of children that are not doing well. We need to bring the bottom up, right? What are we doing about that? How are we going to get there? It's not up to us as a board to decide how we're going to get there. That's what we have a superintendent and administrative team for. It is up to us as a board to say, get us there, figure it out, right? And then give us regular reports on as to the progress that's being made, so that we as a board can see that our directive to raise that or close that achievement gap, the things that we're putting in place, and I hate to bring business terms into it, but that we're seeing a return on our investment, right? That the amount of time, the amount of money that we're putting into curriculum, the amount of time they're putting into training, the amount of time they're putting into professional development, the amount of money that we're putting into professional development, right? That all of that is showing some sort of gain in our academic scores. Because if it's not, then we need to do something else. So what is that other thing, right? Or why aren't we achieving where we think we should be achieving? So asking those tough questions, it's not the most pleasant part of being on the board, I get that, but it's probably one of the more important things that we as a board have to do, okay? Value differences of opinion and does not let differences degenerate into personality conflicts. So again, 3 reds, 3 yellows. So where are we on respecting fellow board members and their differences of opinion? Do we adopt as a board a order of conduct or a set of conduct or anything along those lines? Do we feel that we're following those?
Not always.
Not always? Okay.
Jay, I think years ago when, I like what we're doing now with public, having more public presence. I think it's healthy for the district. But one of the things that's a little bit hard to adjust to, especially like in a work session setting, I know myself personally, sometimes I take a contrary position I didn't even agree with, just to get the discussion involved, so we talk through it. It's harder to do that now under public scrutiny, because
You may be held to it.
you'll be held to it even though
It's not necessarily your opinion.
it's not my opinion, but
Sure.
the intent was we needed healthy discussion.
Sure.
And we tend not to do that as much anymore. In fact, we used to, if somebody was quiet during a discussion, we'd step up and say, we haven't heard from you, what are you thinking? But it's been a long time since I've heard us say that to each other.
Okay. So, one of the things that we need to consider, as the board, we're one of the more visible parts of what happens in the district. Okay? With the teachers, what happens in the classroom with the teachers, that happens in the classroom. And, the teachers are there, the students are there, but, we're not there. The public, for the most part, isn't there. The occasional parent in an elementary school classroom, but especially at our middle and our high school, the parents aren't generally there during the day. And so the teachers are visible in that they're in the classrooms, they're at the sporting events, things of that nature, but they're not as visible as the board is, right? And so the board kind of sets the tone for everything else that's happening in the district. And if we have a high-functioning board, that generally means we have a high-functioning administration, that generally means we have a high-functioning academic team, it just kind of all funnels down. If we have discord amongst board members, it's going to resonate throughout the district. And so that's something that we as a board need to keep in mind. So yes, we're going to have differences of opinion, absolutely, and that's healthy and that's good, okay? Even a 7-0 board, or a board that is consistently a 7-0 board, that doesn't mean that they're a rubber stamp board. That doesn't mean that they don't have differences of opinion. What it means is that after they have expressed their opinion, they see that they are the 1 or the 2 of the 7 that have that particular opinion. They voice their opinion, and now they're going to go along with what a majority of the board wants to do. So this notion of being an outlier vote or a no vote just to drive home a point, to me, kind of rings a little hollow and a little empty. Because at the end of the night, your no vote really didn't change anything. It was still a 6-1 or a 5-2.
But we don't vote on anything. I don't feel like we do.
Okay, tell me more about that.
When we have discussions, I know I've said at board meetings, what does everyone else think? Because I've been vocal.
Okay?
I couldn't tell you what other board members thought. We don't typically do a public roll call on a vote on different issues. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall a lot of that.
So when you say don't vote, are you saying don't give your opinion? Everybody doesn't give their opinion, or when it comes to our regular board meetings, we're not voting on what the agenda says?
No, just like, for example, one thing that's been controversial is our book guidelines.
Okay.
And in the appeal process, should the Board of Ed be the last step or not be the last step? But we haven't really even talked about it. We say we'll talk about it at a future meeting, but it's been an issue for a few months. But we don't really talk about it. So I don't know how my fellow board members feel about that. How does the community know how we stand? Unless we've been vocal, that they might not know how each board member feels about it.
Sure.
And that's just one example. I don't
Sure.
feel like we necessarily have a robust discussion to where everyone would even feel comfortable voicing their opinion.
Okay. How do others feel about that? Is that an accurate representation?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
No?
And I guess I'm stuck on the word vote, because to me, a vote is when something comes before us on a motion, and we vote on it. And there's no doubt that we're all giving our vote. If it's something that's part of our discussion, part of the agenda that we're talking about or getting information on, of course we're not voting, because that's not what we're asked to do and no one's made a motion to vote. Does that mean that every single board member would go around the room and say, how do you feel about that? To Steve's point, normally, 2 years ago, we would have. It's just been very difficult when you know there's, every word you say is recorded and then repeated in some format, even though it may have been, as Steve indicated, maybe you're saying, but what if? Or I'll play devil's advocate. This is how, what about this part? And so it's very much stymied our discussion. And so I understand with Barb being the newest board member, why that's the only impression she's really had. Because, really realistically, Barb, you've only had, what, a year of normal since COVID? And one of the things that I think would be helpful for our public to hear is some of your thoughts on what a true vote means versus what a discussion about a particular issue is.
Well, thank you very much, Dawn. So I was leading right into that. So, as a board, our main function is around governance, okay? We are a policy-driven body, right? So we write policy, adhere to policy, make sure that policy is enacted. So, if, for instance, we had a presentation from our superintendent or the high school principal about the new attendance policy that was put in place. And the new attendance policy is show up whenever you want, as long as you pass the class, that's fine. As a board, I would think you might have an issue with that particular policy. So as a board, you would then engage in a conversation around why you think that a policy of just showing up whenever you want as long as you're passing the class is probably not the most academically sound, most prudent policy to have for a bunch of teenagers at the high school that, if left to their own devices, whatever. So you would have a robust discussion around that. You would then probably turn back to your superintendent and high school principal and say, that policy is not acceptable. Please come up with something a little bit more acceptable, and here are some guidelines that we, as a board, think are appropriate for that. And then they bring another policy back to you. This policy actually makes sense to you. It says, X amount of absences, and then Saturday school to recover those absences, and then these classes for credit recovery, and multi-tiered systems of support, and all the kinds of things that you probably have in place as part of your attendance policy, right? And so that is where you as a board approve that new attendance policy. So you take a vote on that new attendance policy, you have that discussion. So motion, second, okay, now let's have discussion. Dawn says, yes, thank you very much, Doug. That policy makes much more sense. You listen to the concerns that we had. You listen to the concerns that came to you from the community during the public comment. You've rewritten the policy. That makes a lot more sense. I'm very happy. Thank you very much. Ken jumps in. Yes, excellent. Very nice job on that. Okay, any other discussion? Everyone else is like, no, this is great. Okay, now let's take a vote. And then we vote, and then the policy is in place. And then 6 months down the road, you put an agenda item on there, attendance policy, how's it going? And then you get a presentation from your superintendent or possibly your high school principal, and they talk about all the improvements that this new attendance policy has made, how tardies have gone down, there's not as many kids wandering the hallways between classes, you've seen an uptick in grades, all the kinds of great things that we would expect from that new attendance policy. Okay? And that's just one example. But that's kind of the place of us as a board, is to approve those policies, to make sure those policies we have in place are being enacted. Are you a Neola board?
Yeah.
So you've got a raft of Neola policies in there. And you have revisions that come to you every now and again because something's changed, there's a new technology. I know for a while there are a whole slew of new Neola policies coming around, cyberbullying and all that kind of stuff, right? So you got all those policies. So yeah, you get those kinds of things all the time. Now, I've seen some boards where they just pretty much rubber stamp whatever Neola brings forth, and they're like, okay, sounds good, sounds good, sounds good, boom, done. I've seen other boards that will pick those policies apart and talk about the pluses and the minuses of the new policy. Do we need to make any changes that better fit us as a board, all that kind of. Either way, as long as we're discussing those policies. But that's how we as a board get our work done, and that's our responsibility around those policies, around that board governance. That's our area. So as it relates to attendance, as it relates to budget, finance, as it relates to the contracts that that we're going to have negotiated for our bargaining groups, right? We set the parameters as the board, okay? Just a for instance, not holding anybody to this, but if you decide that, a 3% increase is where you want to set your limit, then Doug knows your limit. He goes forth and does that negotiation, knowing that the board is only going to approve up to 3%. Maybe he comes back to me and says, okay, 4%. As a board, we say, okay, we can live with that. But again, we're going to take a vote on that, right? Because we have set forth the policy that 3% is where we want to stay. So again, that's where we live. That's where we do our work. Okay.
I think, Jay, there may be some areas, and particularly in the area of curriculum,
Okay.
where there are some gray areas.
Sure.
Where we're trying to discern, and, Barb brought up the point about we have a book guidelines, and we're trying to discern, okay, it's books, it's related to curriculum and so forth. Are we taking a vote on that or not? Having the right discussion around it, we need that as well. Make sure we're having the discussion and open, candid dialogue around it. But then, again, there are some of those gray areas where we're wrestling a little bit with, do we take a vote on this or don't we? Again, the area of curriculum, I think in the area of a lot of policies and building and a lot of other areas we're pretty good on. But that's an area
Sure.
that's great to us.
All right, so let's just take a quick look, without getting too into the weeds on curriculum. Generally speaking, for instance, if the superintendent comes to us and says, hey, we need to spend X amount of dollars on a new science curriculum for the elementary school. Okay, new science curriculum for the elementary schools. I think when I was on the board, it was the Battle Creek science kits or something like that. And so it was a program that was developed at Battle Creek, and so they had these science kits, and so it was going to cost X amount of money to bring those into the elementary school. As a board, one of our questions was, okay, well, why that, right? Why that particular curriculum? And so then the superintendent, curriculum director say, well, because this is a curriculum that's widely used in our area. It's a curriculum that's been used by this district, this district, this district. They've seen their M-STEP scores increase in the areas of science. We think it's a fantastic program. There's been some great, use of it, and we've seen increasing scores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As a board, do we have the money for it? Yes, we have the money for it. Is it going to increase academics and increase opportunities for our kids? Are they going to get more hands-on stuff? Are they going to become better at science? Well, that's the hope. That's why we're doing this. Okay, good. Go forth and implement new curriculum. So that's kind of where I see a board's role in curriculum. Okay? Because again, we as board members are not curriculum experts. We're not English experts. We're not science experts. We're not math experts. We're not social studies experts. That's why we have a superintendent, a curriculum director, okay? Some districts don't. A curriculum team, curriculum mapping, teachers. That's why we have all of those things in place. They bring the recommendations to us. And then as a board, because we control the purse strings, right? As long as we have the money for it, and academically it makes sense to us, right? Because we're relying on our superintendent and his team to provide that information to us. So as long as it makes sense to us, then we don't really have much leeway in this, because that's what our superintendent is telling us is the best course of action.
But as a board, we're also representatives of the community, and there are interests, values. I mean, we heard some tonight, right? There are interests, values, stakeholders, et cetera, from the community who also have input. Again, we heard some tonight relative to books and the books that we use in the curriculum. And again, I think that's the other scenario, new science curriculum. So I think we do that. We do it
Sure.
pretty well. I think. It's this is more the gray area around, well, wait a minute,
Right.
we have different stakeholders in the community with different perspectives,
Sure.
and we are representative of the community.
Right. So again, without getting too deep into this, one of a couple things is going to happen here, right? So we're going to go one way, and one group is going to be happy, and another group's not. We're going to go the other way, and the other group's not going to be happy, but the other group will. And so coming out of this, most likely somebody's not going to be happy. And so, as a board, we need to, again, think back to who we're here for, and that's for the kids and the students, that's for the staff, that's for the administrator. I mean, that's what we're here for, right? And so, yes, we're here for the community as well. So we have to take all of that into consideration when we make our decisions. And so that sometimes means that we may go against one of those groups, We may make a decision that is not popular with the teachers, but is very popular with the community. Conversely, we may make a decision that is very popular with the teachers and the kids, but not popular with the community at all. As long as we understand the repercussions for our decisions, then we can sleep well at night knowing that we made the decision that we think was best for whichever group we decide to get behind. And it's not ever an easy decision. But we just need to make sure that we're taking everything into account and making the decision that we think is in the best interest of the students first and foremost. And then the chips are going to fall where the chips are going to fall.
And I think there's a lot you can do with collaboration.
I would
To
agree.
try to meet the needs of.
To get as close as you can to meeting everybody,
I think
absolutely.
There's a lot you can do with collaboration.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So there's some win for everyone.
I think that that's the ultimate goal. And I'm hoping that, that you'll be able to get there with this particular issue. I'll take another one that we've seen a lot, a controversial one we've seen a lot. So we're the Eagles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So be thankful that we're the Eagles. Were we anything before the Eagles? We've always been the Eagles. Okay, we've always been the Eagles. So you know where I'm going with this, right? Yeah. So, that's another one that can just drive a wedge right through. And so then you have to, as a board, again, the board has to decide. So what's, are we going to do something that's probably best for this group or that's best for that group? And, we can try to come to a consensus as to the best of our ability, but we may not be able to get there. And so at the end of the day, we just have to figure out, okay, so, which group here are we going to make happy and which group are we not? Because in some of those issues, as much as we try to come to consensus, we may just never get there. Mm-hmm. And we don't want things to not get accomplished because we're stuck in the muck on some of this. So.
And I think to your earlier point that you do what you can, you have a final vote, no matter which way you vote. If the consensus of the board is a certain direction, then what's best for the community is best for the board to move on. And I think one of the things we struggle with is the continuing comments at some of the board meetings go back several months to something that in effect had already been decided. And we all want to please people, and we all have our own personal feelings.
Sure.
And sometimes it's hard to move past that.
Yeah.
But I appreciate some clarity that you're giving to us, again, that we need to move ahead as the board as a whole, regardless of what I may have voted or not voted.
Yeah. Now, and this is just me. I'm a big West Wing fan, and President Bartlett's catchphrase in that was "What's next," right? And that was kind of his way of saying, okay, we've dealt with that. What's next? Right? And that's kind of how I am. That's how I was as a board member. That's kind of how much to my wife's chagrin, sometimes that's how I am at home as well. And say, okay, that's done. Moving on. What's next? Right? And so that I think sometimes is where we as a board can do a better job. Because yes, I know. Again, not speaking specifically to you all, but I have come across many a board where they have certain board members that are not good at that what's next. Like, it's a 6-1 vote, they're the one, they said their piece, they voted no, the rest of the board's ready to move on to the next item, but that board member just doesn't want to give it up. And it's like, okay, but at some point here, we need to move on to the next thing. We need to figure out what's next. We need to move beyond this. We've taken the vote on this, that is done. Yes, we'll come back in 6 months and check progress because we want to make sure that we're, making progress on whatever it is that we did. But what's next? Let's get on to the next thing. So speaking of next, seeking to build that consensus and environment of trust. So to Barb's point, right? Seeking to get that consensus, that environment of trust. So that's a loaded phrase for sure. Where are we on that environment of trust?
Not as good as we used to be.
Not as good as we used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, this is always a tricky area in that when I think about this environment of trust, one of my go-tos is always that no surprise rule, right? That we as a board promise that we're not going to surprise the superintendent, surprise each other at board meetings with just kind of random off-the-wall, things. Like, we set an agenda, and if we have a process for getting things on that agenda. And if it comes time for the board meeting and we've approved the agenda, to try to sneak something in there at the last minute that kind of violates that environment of trust, right? Because that's most likely something that you're trying, not always, but usually if you're trying to slip something in there at the last minute, it's probably something that you knew if you had brought up earlier, probably wouldn't have gotten on the agenda in the first place. So we want to avoid those kinds of surprises. Again, we expect the same from our superintendent, to not surprise us at a board meeting with a piece of information. We expect that our superintendent's going to keep us as informed as possible. We know that every now and again there might be something that he just found out and is bringing it to us because we need to act on it. But generally speaking, we expect that we're going to get heads up on these kinds of things. And we as a board are going to give our superintendent heads up on, hey, just let you know, we're going to put this on the agenda at the last minute. It's something that we as a board feel we need to address, but we're going to give the benefit to our superintendent to give him that heads up. What other things related to this environment of trust? Sometimes I see issues where we're violating confidentiality. So we're violating what happens in a closed meeting. We're violating confidential documents that that we as a board have privy to that other people may not have privy to. So are we seeing violations of confidentiality? Because remember that violating those confidentialities does put both you as individuals and the district as a whole into murky legal territory. Because by violating, depending on what it is that you violate, but by violating the confidentiality of any particular group or person or anything along those lines, that does put you in a position where you could be sued. So we want to try to avoid lawsuits. I'm sure all of you are looking to avoid lawsuits. I can't imagine you're actively looking for lawsuits. So that consensus and environment trust, I know boards that routinely, meet, off-site for, we used to get together for dinner after our board meetings, and as long as we're not talking board business, which we never were, we're catching up on, family lives and our jobs and politics and sports and all that kind of good stuff. But it allowed us as a board to get to know each other as more than just the people sitting at this meeting once or twice a month. We got to know each other as people. And that made it much easier for us to have these open and honest conversations because we knew that it wasn't anything personal. It wasn't anything, that we had an issue with you or anything along those lines. It was just, I have a different opinion than you do. And I know that I can express that to you and you can express your opinion. And at the end of the night, we'll go out and, have a slice of pizza and a pop and we'll be good to go. So anything that we can do as a board to kind of, build that familiarity with each other makes it easier to build that consensus and does eliminate some of that mistrust.
Jake, well,
Yeah.
that helps us build trust.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. In the eyes of our community, that builds distrust because we're using this as an avenue to talk about things that nobody else is privy to.
Yeah. Well, one, don't do that.
No, even if, let's say we don't.
I know, yeah. So there is a little known stipulation of the Open Meetings Act that does allow us to get together for social occasions. And it is something that is not generally, usually it's we reserve that for holiday parties and things of that nature. But honestly, after sitting at a 2-hour or 3-hour board meeting, the last thing I want to do when I'm done is continue to talk about what we just talked about for 2 or 3 hours.
Yes.
And so, it's going to work in some places, it's not going to work in others. I completely understand where you're coming from on that. I get it. And yes, in some communities, it's going to be, troublesome for sure. There was a district that was routinely having a dinner before their board meetings. And it was brought to their attention that probably wasn't cool because it was before the board meeting. So it was most likely that they were discussing things before they went into the meeting, right? As opposed to, once you had the meeting, you already had all the votes, you already did everything, so after the meeting, what are you really getting together? What are you going to talk about? It's all done already, right? But if you're getting together for dinner before the meeting, routinely, then yeah, that's probably going to cause some issues because then you're most likely preparing. So yeah, that's not as good. Respect the rights of individuals to disagree and handle disagreements without damaging relationships. Deal successfully with controversial items. I think we've talked a little bit about some of these things already. Is there anything here that anyone wants to add?
I think I would just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off as I can. I think underpinning a lot of the leadership section is the fact that we as a board have struggled with what I think are 3 specific issues.
Okay.
And I think that has tended to shade a lot of the dialogue. I think we've received a lot of public input into them, but I think to some degree, the 3 issues remain outstanding and unresolved to some degree. And I think it's, one, the process we undertook around the superintendent evaluation and some feelings that we did not have unanimous agreement at the end of that process.
Okay.
Which informs how we intend to approach future superintendent evaluation processes. And I think that there's probably some dialogue that the board will need to have at some point about what is that process, the timing of that process, and perhaps some feelings of mistrust among some board members about what that process will look like, and will that process be a process that could result in a unanimous vote at the end of future. I don't think we need to go back to rehash old, but I think there is definitely dialogue about what future superintendent evaluations look like. The second is book guidelines. What is our approach, our policy? I think, Barb is, shared even now that there's a desire for additional dialogue around that, and I think that that's probably warranted. And third, I think to a lesser degree, but I don't think I'm off on this, is the discussion around the ruler. And what is our plan around the ruler? And I think
Ruler is?
the SEL curriculum.
Okay.
That we, it's one of the tools in curriculums. It's the tool that came out of an RFP process that we've adopted this school year in a pilot. So I think, at least my perception, when I look at a lot of the answers up here, why is there disagreement? Those are the 3 things that come top of mind for me, that to some degree are a bit of an elephant in the room, depending on the discussion. Then we go, if we really want to get past it, we're going to have more discussion, wrestle with that issue, determine. I like what Barb said about collaboration. If there's a way to get to, better district policy around how those issues are addressed, I think we would be better off as a board for it. But I don't know if it's those 3, or I don't know if there's something I'm missing in
I think you're
I
pretty
think
close.
you did it right on the nail.
Okay. So, obviously, the evaluation piece is definitely something that I have plenty of experience with and could offer you plenty of guidance on. I've talked to Ken a little bit about it already, but definitely something that we can continue to work on. Right off the top of my head, I think that a facilitated evaluation, at least for this next one, would probably be in your best interest. In facilitated evaluations where someone from the outside, such as myself or one of my consultants, would come in and actually run you through the process and kind of facilitate the meeting around the process. And that takes the onus off the board president, takes the onus off the superintendent to run that meeting, so you, as a board and superintendent, can fully participate in the meeting without having to worry about actually running the meeting. And so that frees you up to kind of have that more robust discussion and have somebody actually direct the conversation and facilitate the conversation. So I think that is definitely something that you should consider in the future, for at least the next one, to kind of help you, kind of wrap your heads around what that looks like from here on out. The tool that you're using is the Michigan Association of School Boards evaluation tool. That is a tool built on consensus. And so I have worked with boards in the past where they have not been able to come to consensus on all of the items. And so my general recommendation is to try to come to consensus on all the items to the best of our ability. So if a couple of us are at a 4 and a couple of us are at a 3, can we come to consensus on a 3.5? Okay, and if that's the case, then we'll go with a 3.5 as opposed to a 4 or a 3. Sometimes we'll come into an item where we have 4 or 5 of us are at a 4, and then 2 or 3 of us are at a 1. Now that's going to be a lot tougher to come to consensus on, because obviously those of you that think he's a 4 are not going to be willing to come down to a 2, and those that are at a 1 probably aren't going to be willing to come up to a 3. A 2.5 probably isn't going to work. So we'll try to see if we can figure out why we've got this disparity between some of us at a 1, some of us at a 4. And if we can't come to consensus on something that we can all agree on, a 3 or something like that, then my general recommendation for that is, then we go with majority rules. So if 4 of us are at a 4 and 3 of us are at a 1, we tried to come to consensus, we couldn't, so just like we do other things, we come to a vote, and majority of the vote, a majority of the board, 4, believe that that one is a 4. So that's what we're gonna put down. So what happens is, at the end of this, once we add up all the numbers, the math is what the math is. And so at that point, if we still vote no, then we're kind of voting against math. Okay? Now, some of us may say, well, no, we're voting against the process. Well, but that's the process that you agreed to. Because the process for that evaluation tool is, it's a consensus tool. It's not an averaging tool. In fact, if you use averaging for the Michigan Association of School Boards evaluation tool, if you use averaging, then you run the risk of invalidating the tool. Because the tool was developed, tested in the field as a consensus tool. And if you invalidate the tool, then you put yourselves in a position where someone could then say that it's not a valid evaluation. And that's not a place that we want to be as a board or as a superintendent. So we can talk about evaluation at a later time for sure. You know, the other 2 things are clearly things that you as a board and administration and community are going to have some deep heart-to-heart conversations on and come up with, you know, what you as a board think is the best way to move forward on those things. And if we're working in this environment of mistrust, it's going to be that much more difficult to do. So if we can do everything within our power as individuals to kind of push that off to the side and have those productive, fruitful conversations, keeping in our minds that at the end of this, we're doing what's best for kids, then hopefully we can get to that place where, as a board, we can make a decision that we think is best for the kids in the community. Not an easy pull, for sure, but something that I think is definitely, you know, within your capabilities, for sure.
Can I ask though, of my board colleagues, beyond those 3 issues, have we missed anything? Are there other things that we think we ought to really wrestle with beyond those 3?
I would say problem solving when issues come up, and having them solved either whether it's addressed to the board or the administration, having them solved in an efficient and fair manner. I think that's a major issue in my mind. And I think trust is a major issue.
Can you share
And
more?
these
like-
probably go back to the evaluation process and other things here as well.
Can you share a little more about the problem solving? Like what types of problems, just for example?
We had, just as one here, we had feedback from Amy on half of the eldest son, 150 days after the issue came up. And problem solving in a proper leadership fashion would address the issue at the lowest possible level before it ever came to the board, and done what Barbara suggested with collaboration, getting the people together and getting the issue resolved. That's just an example of problem solving being done very quickly. There are some others, but that's just enough to point out my concern.
Thank you. They very much validate the ones around books. I guess I haven't seen examples to extrapolate beyond the books though.
Yeah, there are other examples of that, but I did want to make one comment on your last slide. You don't have to go back there, but that was the lowest rated area of all of our work here, I believe. And,
Yeah, the leadership area?
I'm just making an observation.
Yeah.
I'm not drawing a conclusion, but I think sooner or later the board has to draw a conclusion. And that we have what I consider an extremely high-functioning school district. I have a lot of confidence in what's being done in our district, very, very high-functioning in most every respect. And that does not coordinate with the numbers on this chart.
It doesn't coordinate with how you as a board feel.
No.
Correct.
It's just an observation.
Yep.
Not a conclusion.
Nope. I think that's a very appropriate. So there's dealing with conflicts among board members in a professional manner. Again, I've got 4 needs improvement, 1 satisfactory. one good, one excellent. So, it's that professional manner that I'm sure is probably, because that's usually, when I do these board sub-assessments, it's usually that professional manner that comes up. And again, just remembering that while you're not professionals, you are volunteers. We still want to comport ourselves in such a manner in which we are that positive example for our staff, for our community, for our kids. And again, that dysfunction at the board level, that unprofessionalism at the board level will resonate throughout your district. And it will make its way all the way down to the kindergarten class, all the way down to your pre-K. Because if the board's not happy or if the board's not professional, then that kind of falls down into administration. And then administration's a little grumpy. And then the teachers start to feel that. And then the teachers are a little grumpy. And then the kids start to feel that. And then their parents are a little grumpy because everything else, so it's self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That ball rolls downhill and you're at the top of the hill. So we want to do everything that we can as a board to comport ourselves in such a way in which we are acting as professionals, even in this volunteer role in which we assume, and that we are treating each other with that respect. That same respect that we would expect our students to give to our teachers, that same respect that we would expect our administration to give to our teachers, that same level of respect that we would want to see from each other. Okay? Display sincere and unselfish interest in public education. Foster teamwork amongst board members by using differing opinions as a starting point toward developing new solutions and consensus. Again, two areas in which I think we've covered a little bit tonight already as well. Any additional comments, questions, concerns around these areas of leadership?
One small thing.
Yeah.
Just the way we're interacting right now is different than quite often we do if you have to grab a mic and pass it around the room. Because if you have to grab that mic and wait till it gets passed all the way around from me to Chad, it sometimes hampers the way we interact with each other. Right now, we're discussing things much more openly than if we had to grab that mic and just pass it around the room every time we talked. I know there's been times where I said, what I have to say isn't important enough to wait
Sure.
for that piece of mechanics. And
Right.
I think that is hampered some of our discussion.
And it's funny you mention that because that goes to two things that we talked about right tonight, right? So it goes to one about the importance and about having someone that is here to facilitate the conversation, right? And two, it was that comment that I made earlier about the fact that we don't have a consistent environment in which to hold our meetings, right? Because if we have that consistent environment in which we can have those microphones on the tables so that we can all hear each other, even those in the back of the room, right? And we can all hear each other, and all we need to do is lean forward to talk into that microphone. It helps encourage that conversation. And when you have that consistent meeting place, it also means that everyone knows where to go when it's time for the board meeting, right? And I know you've got some construction going on, and I understand why you're moving it around. And I have boards that, as a matter of course, move it around to different buildings just to kind of, give everyone an opportunity to have a board meeting. But I've also been in some very nice boardrooms that are built to not only encourage the conversation, but also they've got the full video. They're able to televise all their meetings to the local YouTube channel or to local cable access and things of that nature. They can record all their meetings. They can have formal presentations. So they've got the room to have groups come in, student groups come in and do presentations, all that kind of thing. So again, just one of the benefits to having a dedicated space. So. And I didn't get paid by a contractor to come in and encourage them. Just something that I've observed. Okay.
Can I just go back to one other
Yeah.
thing? And maybe I'm the only one who took it this way, but on the question 9, talks about display sincere and unselfish interest in public education, which develops and contributes to the growth of the students. Because of the community we live in, and I've been part of this since my birth, there's sometimes a perception that even though we're a public school, we don't have to necessarily follow the public school rules. And I think sometimes that does get in the way. I think sometimes it's hard to set aside who we are as a community member, who we are politically, who we are morally, ethically. Not that those things can't work somewhat together, But at the end of the day, this is a school board for a public school. And I have times where I have to struggle with that. But at the end of the day, I remember that that's the oath of office that I gave. And so I'm not sure if I was a one or, the one red or the 1-3, but I feel like sometimes that's part of the struggle we have here.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was just talking to somebody the other day, and they said that they were at a board meeting in a particular district, and the word inclusive was controversial. And I'm like, no, wait a second. Inclusive means including all. And by law, public schools have to include all. We can't, as a public school, turn people away. If they live in our community, they have to be able to come to our schools. I mean, that's how public schools work. So by definition, public schools have to be inclusive. Yet, that is a word that has been taken and, anyway. So to your point, yes, I completely understand what you're saying, that we do have to remind ourselves that, yes, we are a public school and that we have to follow those things that keep us in line and adhere to the law as it relates to the Public School Act of, I can't remember what it is anymore, but not a lawyer. Reminded to not act like a lawyer by my lawyer all the time. Brad Banassi does not like it when I pretend I'm a lawyer. So, moving into this area of academic performance and accountability, again, an area in which overall you were pretty happy with here. This was your third highest. So the ones that jumps out. So this one on the bottom here, question 7, weighs all decisions in terms of what is best for students. I've got a couple reds there. I've got a yellow there. So we've kind of talked about that a little bit tonight already. Does anybody have any further comments on this area of weighing all decisions in terms of what's best for the students? Okay. Anything?
I think we all want to do that. I think that the word all, best for all the students. I think sometimes we grapple with the all of a diverse and changing, student body, and what that means best for all students.
Sure.
And I think there are different stakeholders have different perspectives and different inputs and so forth, and so we wrestle with that to a certain extent on, what does that look like for. And as you said, those are some really challenging questions we have to wrestle with, but we do wrestle with those.
Okay. Anything there, 1 through 6? Like I said, you scored pretty high on all those areas. A couple yellows there, one red there, and the commit to a vision of high expectations for all students. Okay. Question 8, regularly use its scorecard to publicly focus upon its strategic priorities. Now, I've got a don't know here, and usually that means that either they don't know what a scorecard is or don't know if we have a scorecard. And then I've got 2 needs improvement and 2 satisfactory. So let's talk about this for a minute. When we talked about our SOAR plan, are we getting do we get regular updates as to the progress that's being made towards those goals set forth in that SOAR plan? How do those regular updates come to us?
We'll meet in board meetings in a work session, for example, and the administrative team will report out on the status of the SOAR plan.
Okay.
Objectives of the SOAR plan.
Okay. Is that adequate? Do we feel that we're getting as much information as or getting the information that we need from those updates? Are they satisfactory? Are they meeting our needs as a board? Yes, no, yeah? Okay. I remember meeting with the board, talking about this, and the board said, well, how often should we be getting updates? And I said, it kind of depends. I said, you should be getting formal updates at least quarterly. This is generally best practice, get formal updates quarterly. And then informal updates, every now and again, maybe in, the weekly or bi-weekly updates from the superintendent. How often do you send? Weekly? Okay. And the board, they all started looking at each other, and they looked at me, they're like, I'm sorry, the what? I said, the weekly or bi-weekly updates that you get from your superintendent. And they're like, and I looked at the superintendent, I said, how often do you, send the board an update? And he's like, every 6 months or so, I send the community an update, and I just copy the board on that. And I looked at the board president and I said, okay, I said, after this meeting, you're gonna sit down with your superintendent, you're gonna come up with a regular, weekly or bi-weekly update as to what's happening in the district. It's gonna, and it's going to have in there, not only is it gonna have in there anniversary dates and birthdays of staff employees, which is all great, or things that have happened with the kids, that's all good stuff, this kid, just, got a full ride to Yale, and, the basketball team did this, that's all good stuff. But then there needs to be some substantive stuff in there. There needs to be some, something with a little bit of a bite to it. There needs to be some updates as to the progress that's being made towards the goals of the district. There needs to be some updates as to the progress that's being made in the construction or the bond or whatever it is, right? And so the board president was very thankful, and that superintendent wasn't there much longer. So, I think that once the superintendent was actually held to expectations, they decided they didn't want to be the superintendent anymore. So we need to make sure that we're getting that scorecard, and sometimes it's an actual formal scorecard. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a less formal thing. But we should be getting regular updates as to our strategic priorities and how we're progressing towards those. Monitor student assessment results, consider decisions by the superintendent and staff related to program curriculum staffing based on student assessment results. So are we making some of our decisions based on academic progress? And if we're not, then we should start making some of our decisions based on that academic progress. Evaluate the superintendent in compliance with Michigan law and student growth expectations. We've addressed that a little bit already tonight. And like I said, we can definitely discuss that further at a different time than tonight. Anything in here resonate with any of you? Any comments?
Jay, we talked about the strategic plan. Excuse me, a scorecard along the strategic plan where we're at. What are your thoughts around a scorecard for district performance? So, there's some stuff on every website now around,
Yeah.
that's standard stuff. But whatever we decide that's important to us is in terms of how we assess district performance, kind of back to Mark's point about we believe we're a high-performing district, and here's the metrics, if you will, that show that, and that we can share with the public. And do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, so there are districts that do create their own scorecards unique to their district that goes above and beyond the types of reporting that you're talking about. So all of this, if we go to the website, there's two things that every website in the state for a public school is supposed to have, and it's a link to the transparency report, and then it's a link to the data report, the My School data information. And so the transparency report has all the financial information in it, and then the My School data has all of your local district stuff. When we talk about how we're doing as a district, it's important to make sure that we are comparing ourselves not only to ourselves, but also to other districts that are similar to us, and then also to the state, right? So chances are pretty good, I'm assuming, you know what they say about assuming, we're gonna do it anyway. I would assume that in most tested areas, you are outperforming state averages. Would that be an accurate assessment? Okay. So nothing against state averages, but that's kind of a low bar. To be over, to be bypassing and to be achieving at a higher level than the state average, it's not that high a bar. The higher bar is, okay, so how do we compare against districts that are of similar size and similar demographics to ourselves? Or to those districts to which we either lose or gain a significant number of students. So, just a for example, and this may not be a completely accurate representation, but for example, how does Hudsonville compare to Kentwood? Right now, I know Kentwood's a little bit larger than you are, but I would think that it's a relatively decent comparison. Maybe there's a better district that you have in mind. But how are you comparing, how are your test scores doing compared to that district? If there is a district in which you lose a significant number of students of schools of choice 2, is there a particular reason that we're losing those schools of choice students to that district? Is that something we can dig into, figure out? We know that the highest percentage of schools of choice is based out of convenience. So if you have a family that lives in Hudsonville but works in Kentwood, and it just makes sense for them to drop the kids off at Kentwood on their way to work and pick the kids up from Kentwood as they bring them back, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. And that's the highest level of schools of choices. It's just more convenient for the parents to take their kids somewhere else. But if you're losing kids because the district that you're losing kids to offers different programming than you, then that's an area in which you can take a look at, and maybe we need to alter our programming a little bit in order to address that loss and maybe bring those kids back. If it's because, sometimes, because you're a district of significant size, almost 8,000 kids, right? Yeah, so, you're a relatively large district, and so if a student athlete goes to a smaller district, they may be a starter on that team, whereas in your district, they may be a second or third stringer. Again, not a lot you can do about that. That is another way that we lose some kids through schools of choice. But we want to address those kids that we're losing, that we can actually make a change, make an adjustment to, and hopefully bring those kids back into the district. But we can't look at ourselves just in a vacuum. We have to look at ourselves compared to others so that we can see that we're making progress not only against ourselves, but making progress against those other districts and the state averages as well. So back to your original question. Yeah, I mean, we have districts that create those data dashboards, those scorecards that are specific to either their strategic plan, specific to goals that they've set in their district, specific to whatever metrics you as a community have decided that you want to measure that maybe isn't accurately, or at least maybe not even part of the My School Data functionality. Do you have IDEX? Okay. So with access to IDEX, I mean, you could spend weeks, months in IDEX looking at all the different comparisons, and IDEX will spit out to your comparative districts. It will tell you these are the districts that are most like you demographically, these are the districts you should be comparing yourselves to. So with IDEX, you can spit a lot of that data out pretty quickly. And then if you decided that you wanted to display that data in an easy to read format on your website for other people to look at, then that's something you can definitely discuss.
Okay. Doug, we just had that comparison versus some district. Where did those comparative districts come from? Yeah, how were they identified? That's my question.
Their economic size.
State or
Who does it? IDEX does it.
Yeah, IDEX.
IDEX.
Yeah.
Identified those.
So IDEX, interestingly enough, IDEX actually pulls their data from the same space that My School Data pulls it from. They're all pulling it from CEPI. But IDEX just has proprietary software that does what it does versus My School Data, which is just the raw data that they've gotten better. They've reiterated the site, and it's actually much more functional, much easier to look at now than it used to be in the past. And I think they did that in response to the IDEXs and the Munetrixes of the world that have really taken that data and cleaned it up really nicely and easily for you. Now, the downside is that you probably only have 1 or 2 licenses in the district. Three, yeah. Because it is expensive, and generally that's usually reserved for the superintendent, finance director, maybe HR, or curriculum. But it is information that you as a board can request of your superintendent. I'm sure he would be more than happy to easily put that together for you, bring to you if he hasn't already.
Some of the challenges within our, basically, the state assessment over the last couple of years.
Or lack thereof, yes.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Absolutely.
We did this, remember we did this at the group, and in the old boardroom, we sat down with chart paper and went through all of this,
Right.
and then things changed.
But yeah, you're right. No, Okemos and Wall Lake, that makes perfect sense. Absolutely.
Good.
Okay, anything else in this area? I mean, I love to see that celebrate the success at all levels of the system that improves district performance. Good and excellent, that's great. I'm happy that we're celebrating our successes. That's awesome. Continue to do that, for sure. Okay, board responsibilities. So again, one of the higher areas, this is the second highest area that you scored in. Our second one here, focus on policy issues rather than management issues, refer all potential district-wide issues to the superintendent. So let's break this up. So let's take the first part of this, focus on policy issues rather than management issues. Where do we feel we fall on that? A couple of us here think we need some improvement on that. So this is that dreaded micromanaging, right? Where if we are focused on management issues, that is an area in which we as a board should be staying far, far away from. We should be focusing on the policy issues. So where are we on that?
So how do you deal with situations where things are in administrative rules and guidelines and policies, but not board policies? Is that hands off?
Do you have an example?
Well, book policy.
Book review guidelines.
Yeah, so those are not board policies. Those are administrative.
Those are administrative policies. So they are administrative policies. So generally speaking, we're going to, as a board, we're going to lean on our administration to make those decisions. If we as a board believe that that is a decision that we want to take on. So I mean, we can look to mask mandates. Now, this was one particular area of the state in which a district was sued. And the reason that district was sued because that particular parent believed that the mask decision should have lied with the Board of Education versus lying with the superintendent. Okay? The district's contention was that that was an administrative decision, that keeping the health and safety of the staff and of the kids in mind is something that's a responsibility of the superintendent, and so they contended that was an administrative decision. And that judge in that area, in that particular part of the state, decided that yes, that was an area in which the superintendent had the right to make that decision without taking it to the board for a vote. Okay? One instance, one area of the state, just as an example. So, something to consider. Now, I know some boards that were more than happy to let that be an administrative decision, to remove themselves from that position, because they're like, hey, this is an administrative decision, right? Or the county and the CDC have decided X, and we as a district are just following the rules and the regulation that was put in place. And I know some boards that were just more than willing to let somebody else handle that particular decision. And I have no problem with that. Now, had a board decided that they wanted to take a more active role in making that decision, again, from a board member, kind of governance perspective, I have a little bit of an issue in that because I believe that that is an administrative decision. And as long as the administration is not being what, in my mind as a board member, grossly negligent in their decision-making, then I'm going to go ahead and defer to them on those administrative types of decisions. Now, if I believe they're being grossly negligent in their decision-making, then as a board, we can have that, I'll have that discussion with my board. If I'm the only one on a board of 7, I can bring it up, I can have that discussion, but if the 6 of us, the other 6 of the board members are, against me on that, then so be it. But again, if it's an administrative decision, I'm going to lean towards allowing the administrators to make that decision, again, as long as it's not something that's grossly negligent. We won't get into grossly negligent versus just regularly negligent, but I think you get what I'm saying here. So to that point on the books, yeah, again, it's a tough one for sure.
I think what I've seen happen is that because of the public pressure, I feel like our board has gone further and further into the weeds of micromanaging. And some of it speaks to the whole thing of trust and how to deal with all that. But I remember when I was on the board in 2010, I was told several times by board members, that's getting into the weeds. That's the job of the superintendent and the administration. And I've learned to navigate through that, but I feel that some of our board members are sliding backwards into that. Right. And I'm not going to speculate as to why, but I do think that is something that we could probably work together on and reminding each other of that.
Sure. As a board, we hire a superintendent to deal with the day-to-day operations of the district. That's what we as a board do. We hire a superintendent to deal with the day-to-day operations. So as a board, if we have an issue with how the day-to-day operations are being handled, then as a board, we have to have that discussion with the superintendent. And that's one of the reasons that we do an evaluation at the end of every year. We don't have to wait for the evaluation to have that discussion. In fact, I would recommend that you don't wait for the evaluation to have that discussion. The evaluation is the end of a year-long evaluation process, okay? The evaluation process isn't just that meeting that you have at the end of the year, done. The evaluation is a year-long process, and that by the time you get to that evaluation at the end of the year, it should be pretty clear how it's going to go, because you've been having those discussions throughout the year. You've been getting those quarterly updates. You've been having those discussions. You've let your superintendent know when you as a board feel that this needs to be changed, that should be changed, let's take a look at this, let's take a look at that. We're not just going to hold it all until the evaluation and then dump on it and just say, hey, why haven't you done anything about any of these things? And then the superintendent's like, well, what are you talking about? I didn't even know this was an issue, right? So we can't fix what we don't know is broken. And if we as a board aren't talking about these things throughout the year with our superintendent, then we can't expect them at the end of the year to all of a sudden have fixed all these things when we never brought them up, in the first place. So we want to make sure that we're having these discussions across the entire evaluation cycle.
Which is I know at least for myself, Jay, I almost called you Brad. Jay, you're not a lawyer. I know.
Not a lawyer, no.
But at least for myself, that was a key lesson learned from this year. And MASB lays out, a structure in terms of how to work through the evaluation process for the year. And kind of back to the point of working to facilitate that and doing some things in June and then September in preparation for the end of the year. I think that's something that is important for us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving down to number 6 here, talking about willingly embrace a strategic role and regularly self-monitor and adhering to the limits of that strategic role. So again, this kind of plays into that management versus policy, because as a board, that's where we are. We're in that strategic goal, right? We set those strategic goals, but we don't set the parameters around how we're going to get there, right? That's up to the administration, superintendent, and his team. So as a board, we can get together with our community, take all that input from our community, from our staff, from our teachers, from our students, and we can take all that information, we can develop those goals, as a group, and then as a board, we say, okay, so these are the goals that we've set, get us there. And that's up to the superintendent and their team. And then we as a board can expect regular updates as to the progress being made. Those weekly updates, quarterly updates, presentations from curriculum director, finance director, building principals, whatever it is, but we're getting that regular feedback as to the progress that's being made towards these goals. And as a board, that's what we're evaluating, okay? The progress being made towards those goals. And that keeps us in that strategic role and keeps us out of the weeds and out of the day-to-day. Again, here pretty much in agreement. Ensure systems of accountability are in place at all levels. So again, just making sure that we have those accountability measures in place. Does anyone have any comments on this one? I mean, obviously, the superintendent evaluation is one level of accountability. Contract negotiations are another level of accountability. Teacher evaluations are a level of accountability. Administrator evaluations are a level of accountability. We are relying on our superintendent to take care of all of those things and then report back to us as to the results of those. As a board, the only person that we evaluate is our superintendent. We rely on our superintendent to then make sure that everybody else is evaluated in a timely manner by the end of the school year, et cetera, et cetera.
Can I just give a shout out to, go back one, Pat, on question 12. I think it was the only one that I seen that was a salad.
Oh, there you go. Approve and monitor the budget based on additional strategic priorities. There it is. Nicely done. Okay, ensure that effective evaluation system is in use for all employees in accordance with Michigan law where specified. So, on this one, one of the things that you evaluate your superintendent on is the evaluation process. And so, by law, all teachers have to be evaluated by the end of the school year. The persons responsible for evaluating have to be trained in the tool. So, you said you're using 5D, so that 5D training has to be undertaken by all your building principals, your curriculum director, whoever's responsible for doing the evaluation. They have to be trained in that tool, okay? Any teacher that needs to be put on an improvement plan because they got a minimally effective or ineffective, then those plans need to be put in place and then they need to be held to that plan and then progress needs to be made towards getting themselves off that plan. If all of that is happening consistently across the district, then when it comes time for you to evaluate your superintendent, you have, effective or highly effective, just depending on how all that happens. Now, as a board, how do we get that information? Well, it's just as simple as asking our superintendent for a report and just saying, hey, are all the building principals trained in 5D? Yes, they are. Here's when they went to the training. Okay. Are all the evaluations being completed by the end of the year and sent up to the state as part of the rep report? Absolutely. Here's what it looks like. So as long as that information is being shared with us, then we know that we're satisfying that portion of the evaluation law. Okay? And the state does random audits of districts. If they get rep reports that are incomplete, they're going to call back and say, hey, I think you might have missed something here.
And usually that's all it is. Usually they just miss something and they put it in the rep report and it goes back. Occasionally they'll be like, no, we didn't quite get all the evaluations done. And then the state says, get all your evaluations done. They got lots of things on their plate. That's not necessarily at the top of their list, but they will call you on it if they do an audit and find out that you don't have all the things in place that you're supposed to have in place. Monitor district performance on regularly scheduled timelines while allowing evaluation of individual performance to occur at the administrative and building level. So again, that's just related to evaluation, making sure that we're doing everything that we said we were doing in a timely manner. All right, board effectiveness. So here we're at one of our areas of yellow. It's our highest area of yellow. Not a lot of things in here, but 4, read relative information related to agenda items, inform himself on agenda items prior to board meetings, ensure decisions are impersonal, objective, professional, demonstrate professional and ethical decision-making skills. This basically just comes back to some of the things we've already talked tonight about making sure that we as board members are being as professional as possible in our interactions with each other at the board table. Also, in our interactions with the public and the community outside of the boardroom, and that includes social media. That's one of the areas in which I see a lot of board members get themselves into trouble, in that they will take those decisions that they talked about at the meeting, and maybe they were that 1 or 2 outlying vote, and instead of leaving it at the board meeting, they then take it onto Twitter and Facebook and whatever else after the meeting. So, not recommended. That's definitely one way to violate the trust of your fellow board members for sure. That reading relative information. So coming to the board coming to the board meetings prepared, for those meetings. I understand that we all have jobs and life happens sometimes, but I had a discussion with the board one time and they grabbed me on the break and they said, okay, so we've got one board member that consistently doesn't read anything, and then like 5 o'clock before the 6 o'clock meeting is on the phone with the superintendent or on the phone with the board president, and just panicking about all these things that are on the agenda that they didn't read anything about. What can you do about that? And I said, I got you covered. So we came back from board, and I looked at the board and I said, okay. I said, board, imagine this. You're having a board meeting, and it's time for the superintendent's presentation, and the superintendent is not prepared. As a board, how would you feel about that? And they were like, well, no, they're supposed to be prepared. It was on the agenda. They're supposed to be ready to present to us. That's what, it's been on the agenda for a week. And I said, okay. I said, so if that's your level of expectation of your superintendent, is it unfair to then expect that of yourselves? That you are also coming to the board meeting prepared as well? Well, I guess. I'm like, okay. And I said, and if you're not, then it's only your fault that you didn't come to the meeting prepared. And I understand life happens, and maybe you were gone all weekend and you didn't get a chance to look at it, and that's fine. But that means that you just got to stifle it during that meeting. Just hold all those questions that you've got, all that information. You have to hold on to it and get it answered at a later time, because it's not the rest of your board's fault that you came to the meeting not prepared. So be respectful of your fellow board members that all took the time to prepare themselves, and just stifle that stuff and hold on to it and get your questions answered at a later time. Okay, all right. So, just something to keep in mind. Come prepared. If we're not prepared, that's fine, but let's not make an issue of it because we didn't come prepared. All right. Represent the entire community and refrain from making decisions based on special interest groups or individuals. So, clearly, an issue. And then I've got 1 board member in the unsatisfactory, 3 in the needs improvement, and 1 in the satisfactory. So this is a majority of the board believes that this is an area of concern. So what have you got on this one? Is this related to more of the same types of things that we've been talking about tonight so far? Yeah. Okay. So it is difficult to represent the entire community. I get that. This is probably not surprising to you, but a vast majority of people that run for a board seat have a single issue that they're running for. And so sometimes it's an issue with a particular staff member because their child was wronged by that staff member, and they're going to get on the board and they're going to get that person fired. And I know that sounds ridiculous. I've seen it happen. Sometimes it's related to non-academic things that have happened in the district that they're really upset about, whether it be something athletic or something, completely unrelated to the academics of the district, but they're gonna get on the board, they're gonna get that change. They're gonna get it done. The flip side of that is I can't tell you how many of those single issue board members that once they get on the board and find out what it's really like to be on a board, find out that one, they're one of 7. So they really can't get anything accomplished unless they can get at least 3 other people to join in with them. And 2, once they're on the board, they get to see how the sausage is made, right? And once they get to see how the sausage is made, then they're like, oh, so this is, this is the work. This is how it works. So we need to make sure that we're doing our best to represent the entire community and that we're not making decisions based on just those special interest groups. We have issues where we have people come in and they talk about, and you saw some of that tonight, right? The difficult thing for us as a board is to then determine how much of the true community feels that way, right? So we've got research out there, we've got surveys out there that have shown us that with all the stuff that's been going on, CRT, masks, the books, all that kind of stuff, a majority of people aren't really paying much attention to any of it, right? Now, that's across the country. What we need to do is determine within our community how much of this is a community issue, how much of this is an issue of not a majority of the community. And so that's going to be something that you as a board are going to have to try to figure out to the best of your ability and wrestle with. And so, and again, it could be around anything, right? It could be any decision. It could be a financial-based decision. It could be closing of a school building. One of the toughest things that as a board we ever have to do, close a school building, right? Well, if we listen to the people that are directly impacted by the closing of that school, a neighborhood school, right? And they're concerned, well, what's going to happen with this building that's in the middle of our neighborhood? It's notoriously difficult to market an empty school building, regardless of where it's located. But then add to its location the center of a neighborhood, what's going to end up there? And that is something that community around that school is concerned with. But the larger school community is concerned with keeping open a building that's a drain on the school budget, that has little to no kids in it, because kids don't live in that neighborhood anymore. It's an older, graying neighborhood. And so what can we do to address those community members that are directly impacted, but also keeping in mind the bigger picture of the larger community that's going to be impacted if we continue to pump money into an old building that nobody uses, right? And so, yeah, that's going to be tough for us. Because if we close it and it ends up becoming a charter school, that's obviously going to impact us very deeply as a district, right? If we close it and it becomes, dare I say it, a marijuana store, I mean, yeah, the community directly around that may not be happy with that, right? Now, we were fortunate enough in our district that we closed a building in the middle of the neighborhood, but coincidentally, the city was looking for a new city hall. And so they were willing to buy the building office for $1 so they could turn it into their new city hall. And then they used the savings from not having to purchase a building into retrofitting the school to, suit them better as a city hall. Because I'm not sure if you're familiar with school buildings, but they're notoriously difficult to repurpose because they're built for one thing. They're built for school, and classrooms and walls, and it's just kind of tough to turn them into something else. So this was a win-win in that they were able to take that building, turn it into a city hall. They kept the playground as a community park. They turned the gym into a community gym. They turned half of the building into garages for their police cars. They kept some of the classrooms for community space. I mean, it was a win-win all the way around. That doesn't always happen, but it was still a tough decision to close that school. And it ultimately, the closing only impacted a fairly small portion of the community. The larger school community was better served because now it's a building that's no longer on the books. It's a building that we're not paying for repair. It's a building we're not paying rent, all that, your mortgage and all that kind of good stuff.
Okay. So again, Jake, you come back to, as we talked before, surveys, focus groups, maybe town halls with a facilitator, a trained facilitator, those sort of tools and approaches in order to discern.
Yeah.
What
And try to get
community at large is.
try to get as most, to your best ability, make sure that this is truly how the community feels. And that should help you in making your decision. And again, not an enviable place for you, I completely understand.
So Jay, not
Yeah.
to play devil's advocate, but are there times that you fight for a group that maybe is only 5% of the district?
Oh, I'm sure there probably is. I'm sure there probably is. And, you know, again, if we're going to go down that road, that's fine, as long as we understand that that's what we're doing. What I would hate to see is, I would hate to see something where we think we're doing what a majority of the community wants, when that's in fact not the case. But yes, to your point, yeah, there may be some things that we have to do that only addresses a very small portion of the community, but it's the right thing to do, or it's something that we need to do, even though the impact is going to be on a very small portion of our community. I can definitely think of some instances in which that may be the case. For sure. Okay, any further discussion on anything related to this area of board effectiveness? Into this next area of data-driven decision-making, have the right data to make the strategic decisions. Now, most of us there are in the green. We've got one outlier there. Base decisions, comments, and questions on objective data. Now we've got 2 reds, 3 yellows. So, as a board, do you feel that you're getting the data that you need in order to make decisions? For instance, when it comes time to approve the budget, are you getting the financial data? And I guess based on that 7 greens there, it sounds like it. Like you're getting that financial data in order to help you make that decision as it relates to budget. When it comes to academics, are you getting the appropriate information to determine whether or not you're meeting those academic goals that you set forth? Graduation rate or attendance policy or whatever else. Are we getting the kind of data that we need as a board?
If I had to make a guess as to why it's across the board, it's probably more on that subjective data.
Okay.
The having the finger on the pulse of the community data, which again is a little more subjective than what's the academics, what's the budget. Those
Yeah.
are numbers. I mean, you can't argue with that.
So we call that perceptual data.
Yes.
Right. So that perceptual data is absolutely to your point. It's how it's how it's perceived. It's how we're perceiving those kinds of things. So, one of my go-to examples of that perceptual data is, a district all of a sudden sees a vast increase in the percentage of free and reduced lunch applications and approvals. And it's like, well, did we all of a sudden get poorer as a community? Well, no. What probably happened was the stigma with free and reduced lunch has not completely vanished, but it's pretty much gone away. It's not as much of a thing anymore, especially these past couple of years with the federal government pretty much coming in and paying for, And then 2, I know in some districts, they just got better at identifying those families in need and getting them the help that they needed. And so those people were there the entire time, right? We're just, as a district, doing a better job of getting to them and reaching out to them and helping them get that paperwork filled out and making sure that they get the services that they need. So the perceptual data is, well, we must be getting poorer because our numbers went up. But when we dig into it, the reality is, no, we're just doing a better job of communicating it out to those people and getting the help that those people need. So yes, that perceptual data, the dreaded Facebook monster, Twitter, all the online chat rooms, all that kind of stuff, that's definitely a tough one to battle. We need to monitor it to the best of our ability, which is a whole different animal. But it is something we need to keep an eye on and keep a pulse on because, if we don't, it can get away from us really quickly. And we need to be able to nip some of these things, especially the ones that are just way off on their assumption or their perception. Do our best to address those things with the appropriate data so that they understand that, no, that's not the case at all. Okay. Use data to assess outcomes, recognize the need for research to inform decision-making, and I think we've addressed these as well. Any other questions or concerns in this area of data-driven decision-making? Sometimes with the data, it can be difficult for us as a board. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And so, that just means we need to continually, ask questions of our superintendent, and ask them appropriately, professionally, and not surprisingly, and hopefully. Now, there are going to be some instances in which the data that we want may not exist. We may want data on, well, geez, it sure would be nice if we knew how many kids were wearing baseball caps in the classrooms, because, boy, we don't need them wearing baseball caps in the classrooms. Well, I don't know that that data exists. I don't know why we're concerned about it either, but, that's beside the point. But yeah, I don't know that that data exists as to how many kids are wearing baseball caps in the classroom. So we probably won't be able to come up with any conclusion on that. Unless someone wants to, show up and start, making counts. Okay. Board superintendent relations. So 3.77 on our scale here. So one of our areas in which we're satisfactory. So I've got a little bit of red through here, but I got a lot of green in here. I've got one unsatisfactory here in the provide a clear set of expectations of performance and personal qualities against which a superintendent will be measured. I know we've talked a little bit about evaluation already tonight. Is there anything further that you wanted to talk about as it relates to evaluation and expectations of our superintendent and goals and all of those things?
Again, I'll say again that I think it's a process we can improve on. So look forward to working with you on that.
Okay. That the evaluation, so, as a board, there really are only two things that by law we have to do as a board, right? We have to evaluate the superintendent, we have to hire a superintendent. Those are two things because by law we have to have a superintendent in place. We have to have a superintendent record in place. And it rests on the board to do that hire. We have to evaluate the superintendent, that is also. So those are, two of the preeminent things that we as board members have to do by law. So yes, we have a lot of discussion around those because we want to make sure that we're doing them fairly, accurately, and within the law. But evaluating the superintendent is also one of the toughest things that we as a board have to do. So anything that we can do to make the process a little easier, I'm all for, and I will do what I can to help you through that as well.
One of the most difficult things for me, speaking personally, is it's hard coming from industry to use the evaluation process that you see in academics.
Sure.
The way I would do it in an engineering firm is far different
Absolutely.
than the way you see in an academic setting. And sometimes trying to get your hands around that and do an appropriate job is a difficult task.
Yeah. There was a time in the not too distant past when the superintendent evaluation used to go something like this: Doug, nice job, keep it up, and that was it. I mean, that was like the beginning, the end, and that was it. That was the evaluation, right? You're doing a good job, we got no problems, keep it up. Okay? Then we put in place the evaluation law, and it kind of swung the pendulum maybe all the way to the other side, right? And so is there a happy medium in here somewhere? I'd like to think so. I don't know that we're quite there yet. We've already talked about the issues with evaluation and growth, especially with us not having all the data that we need because of the pandemic and skipping a year. I get all of that. And there have been some discussions around possibly replacing growth completely, possibly dropping it back down to 25%, which is where we started, as opposed to the 40%. All kinds of discussion around that, but have yet to see any significant traction on any of it yet. They were talking about getting rid of evaluations this spring for teachers, but that's pretty much died down, and we're to the point now where it's pretty much a moot point anyway. So I don't think that this is a discussion that's dead necessarily, but I'm just not sure when we're going to get enough traction on it to make any significant changes in the way that we evaluate. So it's what we have, it's what's in place, it's what we need to deal with. It's not perfect by any stretch, but I think it's still a tool and a process that can be used effectively, and that we can get some good information out of it, and that we can make some positive strides forward for our superintendents, as long as we're using it in that growth mindset, as opposed to that hit them over the head with a hammer mindset. So, anything else on this page? working with the superintendent in a spirit of mutual respect, open communication, trust, and confidence. I am of the mind that we start from a place of trust until we're given reason not to. I want to give that professional educator that has spent their life, in education, benefit of the doubt until I'm given reason not to. So I kind of, start from a place of trust until I can't. Any discussion around that? Okay, community engagement and advocacy. So this is our last area. This was our highest scoring area on our scale here. Question 6 here, I've got 2 reds. Seek information in ways the board and community can be more informed. We've talked a little bit about that tonight in the ways in which we can make sure that we're informing the community and talking with the community and facilitated meetings and town halls and all that kind of good stuff. Follow the established procedure for dissemination of information to the public. Ensure that direct educational goals are established and communicated to all stakeholders. Again, a majority of you are okay with these areas, but we've got a couple needs improvement there. Anything around these, around communication to stakeholders, communication to community? Have visibility at district and community events when possible. Unsatisfactory here from one. But again, a majority of you feel you're okay there. Nothing really in here. Again, this is the area in which you scored the highest in. So I think around this one, I think we've talked about some of the issues tonight around communication with our community, communication with our stakeholders. I think that it's an ongoing process. It's something we need to continue to work on and get better on. Communication, again, it's that sticky wicket. It's January 15th, and there's 3 feet of lake effect snow out there, and it's going across the bottom of the TV screen, and it's on your web page, and a robocall went out, and the weather forecast has been out, and oh, hey, look out the window, there's 3 feet of snow out there, so you cancel school. And Doug's still getting a call from somebody that said, I didn't know we canceled school. Why didn't you communicate that better? It's like, so no matter what we do sometimes with communication, it's never good enough. So all we can do is, as we said earlier, put in those systems in place, be assured that we're doing our best to adhere to those systems, and those systems are as effective as can be, and then just take the results and do our best to make sense of it and use it to make good, prudent decisions that at the end of the night are what's best for the kids here in Hudsonville. So those are the things that I wanted to talk with you about. Those are the discussions that I thought were relevant based on looking at your board self-assessment. I will put together some notes and get those to Ken sometime later this week. We'll continue to talk about evaluation as long as you want to. Not tonight, unless you want to, that's fine. But at a later date for sure. And then anything else related to what MASB can do to help support you as a board, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about. What else do we have tonight based around this board self-assessment that we haven't discussed? Anything in particular jump out at you as something that was surprising to you, either good or bad?
I thought it was good to see that fundamentally, when it comes to the questions around focus on student achievement, academic performance, mission-driven, I think there's pretty good consensus and alignment around purpose and why we all show up to volunteer for the goal. And I think that there's general trust around others' motivations around that purpose.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think there's, kind of build on Chad's point, the motivations, the intent, what we're trying to achieve, I think there's alignment on the board. And we do feel like we have, and we want to continue to have a high-performing district. We're a district that we can attract teachers to and administrators to and so forth. So I would agree, I'm gratified to see some of those areas of strong alignment. There's some areas where we've got to shore up our methods of communication and shore up our process, our approach a little bit. Again, the superintendent evaluation thing is a key one that I have in mind. And I think another area we continue to explore, Jay, is how we get the community input in a way that we can discern through it and kind of figure out, okay, what are we hearing from the community, what are we hearing from other stakeholders? And we do surveys and those sort of things now, but how else can we learn in that regard? That still sticks with us.
Yeah, I think that it's, if as a board, we are seen as being receptive and, to that information that's being presented to us, and that we're handling that information in a way in which is perceived to be positive, then we'll continue to get that feedback that we're looking for. If a board is openly hostile to the information that's being presented to them, not saying that you are, just as an example, but if a board is openly hostile to that information being presented to them, if they show no interest in getting that kind of information whatsoever, then they're not going to get it, right? And so people are going to be reluctant to give it to them because they don't do anything with it anyway, or they don't want to hear from us, this, that, and the other. So everything that we can do as a board to show that we are listening and that we're taking those feelings into account, or that we've at least considered them as we made our decision, then that's going to increase the likelihood that we'll get people to participate in the process.
And kind of, building on that, and something that just happened to us just recently, we had our annual renewal, non-homestead, renewal. And we'll typically bump up in the high 60s, maybe 70s, somewhere around there. But this year we were down 15 points, I think, from the previous year, down 57%, is that right?
Something like that.
Yeah, 57% or so approval, and we all, so that was like hey, wait a minute, and we heard from some community members that he was trying to communicate with you, we're trying to tell you, we're trying to give you a message here around book guidelines or ruler or, the three things that Chad mentioned earlier. And so, we're kind of wrestling with that now, going, okay, what do we take away from that? How do we sift through that data? Is it a one-time blip, or is this something that's going to continue? I mean, we're processing that now.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but that's a dangerous game, because, that non-homestead is significant. And to not pass that is, that can be very detrimental to the district. And so,
that's why
I know,
about it.
and I understand that, they're trying to send, and I get it, but I think that's one of those instances where the unintended consequences of that may not be something that's being considered, right? And so that's where we need to make sure as a board and as a district, as a community, that we're communicating to everyone the importance of this. Now, I don't know why we still voted on the dang thing to be given, but anyway, that's a discussion for another day. But that's a significant amount of revenue for the district, and so to potentially lose that would be, for some districts could be catastrophic. And so it's unfortunate that we've come to that point where that's how they're trying to get their message across to us. And I get it. I want to make sure that we're listening and hearing from everybody. But yeah, no, I hear you. That's a tough one for sure. I'm glad that it still went through, but yeah, you're right. It definitely grabs your attention and gets you to open up. Try to figure out what we can do to address some of those things for sure.
And it's hard when they perceive that you're not listening because you don't agree with them.
Right.
And again, perception is their reality, and trying to say, yes, we hear you, you're not the only voice, and I don't necessarily agree with you, but thank you for carrying that.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't appreciate that point.
Yeah. No, I understand for sure. Well, if you don't have anything else for me tonight, then I will turn the meeting back over to the president.
Do you mind if I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, please.
Jay, do you have any suggestions for special trainings? And this is great tonight, I think, for our board. Are there other things that I can recommend to the board, whether it be certification trainings or, evaluation trainings, as you had mentioned? Are there things that, I know I get the MASB information, I think all the board members get them. Are there things that are not low-hanging fruit, but ideas that as a board, and I know Barb's been on the board 3 years now, I think it's been more than 2, we started shortly after I began, so.
Absolutely. So when I put together my report for Ken, I will definitely reference some of those things, but, right off the top of my head, I know that you said you have a board, board self-conduct or set of conduct rules.
Code of conduct.
Code of conduct rules, thank you. MASB has put together, best practices, and it's escaping me what the document's called right off the top of my head, which is why I'll give it to you later. But yes, we have a set of board expectations that boards have adopted. We have a variety of classes related to communication, communicating to the community, things of that nature that may be helpful. Communication in difficult times is one of the courses I'm thinking of right off the top of my head. But I'll definitely put together a list of some recommendations and get those to Ken for sure.
Used to have a certification training, didn't they? I did, when I came on the board, because then years ago, I went through.
For evaluation?
No, just certification training for board member, right, for a whole gazillion classes.
Yeah, so we have different levels. So obviously we have the 101, which is the introduction to board service. That's a 6-hour class. We recommend that for every board member. And then we have some different levels of certification. You can become a certified board member, after you take a certain, number of courses. We have a data certification. We're working on an advocacy certification as well. So yes, we definitely have those in place.
It was very helpful for me.
Yeah.
As an board member.
In fact, let's see. So it looks like Mark. Is Mark not here tonight?
Mark's right here.
Oh, Mark, you're Mark.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, so you've got your level 2 award of merit.
Or is that a low rank?
Yeah, I forget how many levels there are, but yeah, so you've taken enough classes to get your level 2 award of merit. So there you go.
How high can I go?
Well, hey, as high as you want. We got more classes for you, so as high as you'd like to go, Mark. We'll keep.
I want to be the rankest one here, that's what I want to be.
Has the evaluation tool changed enough that the whole board should go through it again, or just board members that haven't been trained?
So I would say that since it's been 6 years since any of you have been through the board training and have had the board training, it was 2016 in which some of you took that training. My recommendation would be to do a whole board training on the board evaluation, and so that gives you an opportunity for those board members who have been through the training to get a refresher on the training. It allows you as a board to have a discussion around evaluation that is specific to your district and your superintendent and what's going on in your district. So yes, I would recommend a whole board training on superintendent evaluation for everyone on the board and the superintendent.
I have one last question. All these terms for the cluster analysis are very self-descriptive, except the first one. Can you define leadership?
Oh, you're talking about the board, why they labeled that first one as leadership?
When I read the description and the questions, I don't know if leadership was the term that I would have used to summarize those questions. And I'm wondering if it can be described, maybe it's in a response to Ken as a summary. Because the other ones, responsibilities, accountability, effectiveness, data-driven, those are very self-description in the questions. The first one does not scream the term leadership when I read those.
Yeah, I think that this is more around, and I see what you're saying, Doug. So I think that this one, as I'm looking at the questions here, it does, I don't know if leadership is right or if it's more of how we handle ourselves as board members, how we comport ourselves as board members. So I think that's kind of where they're getting the leadership from. So how do we as board members, lead within our role as a board member? Because it talks about, whether it talks about articulating the vision and mission for the district, considering community perspectives, creating an environment of trust. So all the things that we would expect leaders to do, seeking to build consensus, an environment of trust, respecting the rights of individuals, deal successfully with controversial items. So those are the things that I would consider to be integral in in a good leader, and so that's probably why they went with leadership, whether it's the best descriptor for that particular.
To Mark's point about it's the lowest one, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure the description
Sure.
of what the lowest one clearly articulates the questions that were.
I completely
I'm glad you
understand.
said something, Doug, because I looked at that as how you lead as a board, as a body, not our board's leadership.
Yes. Yes, I think that's an accurate assumption. Absolutely.
Good, good, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. There was one more thing we wanted to talk about tonight before we adjourn, logistics for graduation. Somebody brought that up. So, on Thursday.
Pray for dry weather?
Well,
Is that what you're
I'm wondering.
be there at 5:30.
Yeah, please be there at 5:30.
Park
I'll
up in
be-
up by the, what's the word I want?
By-
Or you can park anywhere.
By the training room or
By
the
the
locker
training
rooms,
room,
park
yeah.
over there, we'll have spots for you. I'll send something out so you have an email of where. Please be there by 5:30. We will let you know, we're evaluating the weather stressfully. Up until Wednesday, we'll have to make a decision, probably Wednesday afternoon.
And then
If the rain date is Wednesday, the 1st of June, which will cause plenty of conflicts for district soccer to grandpa and grandma are flying in for graduation, and then, so we're trying to figure that out. But we hope we have a window. Unless you have a
We'll be
string
in the
in
middle
large
of a
tent.
track meet, going on.
On the 1st? No, we will not. We're on the football field. We'll be facing the stands, the home stands.
So we'll be allowed to bring a blanket and a face shield if it's.
Feel free to bring a blanket. Full transparency, it was warm enough when graduation started last year. It just got cold for our
Yes,
graduation.
exactly.
Bitter cold, so. Yeah. So does that answer the questions?
Yeah.
And I'll send out a detail. I have to get it yet from Jordan. I know it starts at 6. We'd like you there at 5:30. Your responsibilities do not include handing out diplomas, unless there's particular child, neighbor, friend that you're so inclined. I do think once we move into the new field house, we're going to probably have a structure that we hopefully can follow for many years, since this is now year 4, and I have yet to have a normal graduation that's been the same year after year.
So if it makes you feel any better, I graduated from Sterling Heights Stevenson's, that's Utica Community Schools, so 4 high schools in that district, and when I graduated, we used the Pontiac Silverdome. And then, after the Silverdome was no longer in use, they moved them over to the Palace. And so for years, they would have all the graduations at the Palace. And then the Palace became no longer, and so they held their first outdoor graduations at what is now thankfully, again, Pine Knob. That first year, they had 2 of the high school graduations that went off without a hitch, but then the other 2 just completely just downpour, drenched, I mean, just awful, so, yeah. We get to do ours in Breslin,
Okay.
yeah. But, yeah, it's nice to be having an indoor facility for sure, that can hold everybody.
So Pine Knob, is that the DTE?
No, Pine Knob.
No, they're back to Pine Knob again, yes.
It's a great facility.
Yes, they are.
So Jay, if you could hang out for just a minute,
Yeah.
I'm sure the board will want to thank you for your
Absolutely.
time, and when we're done, we'll do a roundtable and then we'll adjourn.
Absolutely.
Anything?
Nope, I'm all set, thanks.
I'm good.
Just a quick comment on the athletic award night. Amazing when you see a huge percentage of these senior athletes at, 3.5 and above, and the top 2 are 4.1 and 4.2. It's mind-boggling at how amazing these athletes are.
Anything else? I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the open, candid conversation. I know it's not simple. I know there's things that we have to work through and work on. But I thought tonight was good to kind of break down some of maybe the barriers, the silos, whatever that we had. And so I really appreciate the discussion by the board, and we'll continue to forge ahead and find those places that we can approve. I took a bunch of notes myself, so I'm anxious to get your notes and do some comparison, have some discussion, and get information out to the board on how we move forward. So with that, can I have a motion and a second to adjourn, please? Motion by Don, Support from Chad. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Boys volleyball won, sorry. I didn't tell that first. Boys volleyball won tonight.
Oh, did
Oh,
they?
oh.
Now the state finals this weekend.
State
Okay.
finals, where are the state finals at? Like wrestling or
Grand
something?
Rapids Christian, maybe?
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know. I don't know the guy, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I just thought it was pretty exciting.
Okay. That is.